Welcome, everyone, to our Lumina Talk. And those of you who are listening online, my name is Kevin Bates. And today we are talking about an old story. This is Story Time by Kevin. And I hope that you enjoy what I'm about ready to say. This is called Born in the Margins. And it's the Christmas story said a little bit different. Now, everyone in this room probably knows at least the portion of the Christmas story. Maybe not all the details, but I hope that in this discussion, you weave the Christmas story through what I'm talking about, and then you're able to answer the questions in the end. This is how it goes, the Christmas story as told. Every year, billions of people retell the same story. We sing it with carols. We reenact it in plays. We even decorate it on our trees and in our homes. And yet, if we strip away music, we strip away the religion, the stained glass pictures, or even the tiny little homes on your mantles, what remains is not really a religious story. It's a very human story for all of us, a human one. And it begins the way so many human stories do, and that is with power. With power. Empires don't announce themselves as evil. They never do. Empires rarely introduce themselves as villains or criminals. They introduce themselves as order, as stability, as security. They promise efficiency. They promise peace. They promise prosperity. 2,000 years ago, there is a story of one such empire that ruled most of the known world. It controlled land, it controlled labor, it controlled movement, and it controlled money. It built roads, it had an infrastructure bill of armies and systems of taxation. And like all empires, it needed data. Data called a census. The story ordered a census of people, not because it cared about people, but because people are easy to manage when they are counted, when they are categorized, and when they are tracked. And that single administrative decision set this story into a trajectory of motion. The decree of census forced people to travel to ancestral regions to be registered. It wasn't a holiday trip. It wasn't to go see the relatives. It wasn't to come over for Christmas dinner. This wasn't a migration for opportunity, for prosperity. It was displacement because of paperwork, because of non-documentation. Families were uprooted, work was interrupted, housing became uncertain. And among those forced to move was a very young couple, especially a young woman who was poor, who was ethnically marked. They were living under occupation. They had no legal power within the empire. They were a part of a long stereotyped group of people that were, quote, named backward, volatile, and expendable. I guess in modern language, we would call that racialized or stateless or no class, at best, second class. And as they traveled, one thing became increasingly clear: the system was not designed for them. So when they arrived at their destination, there was no room. Metaphorically, also no room for who they were. Not because space didn't exist, but because access is always filtered through power. Scarcity is rarely accidental, it's engineered. Scarcity is designed. There were places for those who had money. There were places for those who had prestige and status. There were places for those who belonged, but for some reason, there was no place in some place called an inn for them. But when you live on the margins, even basic needs become negotiations and contracts. Their child was born not in safety and comfort and maybe in a hospital of care, but in the periphery, outside respectable places, outside institutional care, outside of public concern. This wasn't a tragedy by ancient standards, probably would be considered normal because empires normalized suffering by calling it unfortunate circumstances. Here's one of the most revealing parts of the story that I've seen is the first people to take notice were not leaders. The first people to take notice weren't the scholars. The first people to take notice weren't the officials or the politicians. The first people to take notice were the workers. The shepherds watched their flocks by night. People who lived outdoors, people who labored through the night, people whose economic value was high, but their social value was low. They were the ones who noticed. They were the ones who recognized immediately. Why? Not because of destiny, not because of divinity, even though there was a star by night. Maybe they didn't even recognize that that was God in the present. But they were familiar with the circumstances. They recognized the child because of familiarity. They saw uncertainty. They saw vulnerability. They saw themselves. And this matters. Why? Because solidarity rarely forms among the comfortable. It forms among those who know what it's like to be unseen, unheard, and living on the outskirts of town. Well, meanwhile, though, the ruling class heard rumors of such an event. Not an army, not a rebellion, but an alternate story, something different. And that was enough. Just the story was different because empires are not threatened by weakness. No, no, no. They are threatened by imagination. They fear any narrative that suggests dignity without permission. They fear any narrative that suggests belonging without assimilation. They fear any narrative that suggests worth without productivity. So they respond the way that often power does in these kinds of situations. They started to institute surveillance. They begin to look. They began to control. They began with violence and death and arrest. Families were torn apart, communities were terrorized, children paid the price for the adult fear. Always, empires, children pay the price with adult fear. And suddenly, the young family was no longer just poor. They were no longer without a roof over their head. They were no longer without food. They were what I would deem as what we modern day would call a refugee. See, refugees don't appear out of anywhere. They just don't appear on the scene from nowhere. They are produced. Refugees are produced by policy. Didn't we learn that this year? Refugees are produced by borders, by fear, by force. That's how refugees are produced. Not they just appear out of nowhere. They flee from somewhere. And that somewhere is the scary where of what we would deem nowhere. The family fled not because they wanted adventure, but because they were trying to stay off death. They crossed boundaries. They entered foreign lands. They went to places that we would consider Egypt. Where would that be in our life? They lived without protection. And yet history tends to remember the borders. Oh, we remember the countries and empires that were established, the lines that were drawn of the East and the West and the North and the South. We remember the names and the people and the leaders and the kings and the queens. But we don't remember the people who crossed those lines to survive. We don't remember. So, this story is today, obviously, this story about immigration under duress, racialized populations under occupation, families navigating hostile systems, state violence justified as security, hope emerging where it never was supposed to exist. This story is about angels and power. It's also about miracles and resilience. And it asks a quiet but dangerous question that I think all of us have probably lived in our minds over the last year. What if the future doesn't come from the center of power? Maybe the center of power is not in the center, but power is found in the margins, in the second class, in the no class. This story challenges conventional, linear, and centralized views of progress and change and development. People don't retell this story because the world is healed. People retell this story because the world isn't healed, because families are still displaced, because racism has just adapted to a new racism, because borders still decide whose lives actually matter, because bureaucratic language still hides human cost and human death, and because somehow dignity still emerges in the cracks, not loudly, not violently, not persistently, but dignity is found in the word that we so know, and that is love. Here's the most radical part of the story. Nothing about the story of Christmas looks powerful. There's no horse, there's no carriage, there's no king and queen, there's no sword. It's a baby in a manger. There's no conquest, no throne, no institutional victory. People choosing care over fear. That's what we see with the shepherds by night and the magi who show. Presence over power, solidarity over silence. This story suggests that transformation doesn't begin with control, it begins with paying attention. If I can encourage us today to pay attention because of the Christmas story. So here's the question the story leaves with me, not as some believer in a higher spirituality or divine cause, but as a human being. Because I believe this baby came not for my Christianity, but came to make me whole human. And so when I look at my whole humanness as I make up words today, the next story of hope, will we recognize that story of hope in the margins the next time? Will we recognize it? Will we be the ones who make room for those that have no inn or bed to lay their head? Will we protect it? Or will we do what empires have always done and mistake vulnerability for threat? Because the Christmas story told plainly isn't about something that happened once, it's happening continually. When Emmanuel with us came, that told us the story does not end there. It's something that keeps happening, and the ending is still written. Let's take a couple of minutes. There's 3 questions based on what I just talked about. And I want you to take about 5 minutes or 6 minutes and discuss those 3 questions at your table.
We'll bring everybody back together. Conclude your conversations. Any insights you want to share? None. Okay. We'll start the next narrative. I'm going to read a story. The people gathered as they gathered every year. They came wrapped in coats, scarves, carrying candles, cupped carefully against the wind. Children leaned into their parents. Old friends exchanged quiet smiles, hugs, laughter. The night was cold, but the space between them felt warm with memory and song. Evergreen branches framed the room, garland and trees. A simple manger stood in front, sterile, symbolic, and safe. And when the hour came, for us, 15 minutes past that hour or more, a reader stepped forward and began the prayer that everyone knew or thought they knew. Holy God, he spoke, on this night we remember the angel's song, the long road to Bethlehem, the child laid in a manger because there was no room. The people bowed their heads. We thank you, he continued, for light breaking into the darkness, for hope being born among us, for peace promised to the world. And soft voices whispered, Amen. Bless our homes, the prayer went on, and those we love. Keep us safe. Guard our children. Let peace rest upon our lives. Let's show the candles now, Adam. The candle flickered. No one shifted. The prayer was beautiful. It was sincere, and it was woefully incomplete. As the reader lowered his hands, a figure stirred at the edge of the gathering. He was old, older than his years seemed to allow. His clothes were worn thin. His voice, when he spoke, carried neither anger nor fear, only weight. Forgive me, he said, but I have been sent to speak the rest of the prayer. A ripple of unease passed through the room. This is a holy night, someone whispered. Yes, the man replied softly. That is why the prayer must be whole. He stepped into the light. You have prayed for peace, he said, but peace is never prayed for alone. The people listened now. When you ask for safety of your homes, he continued, you also ask, without saying it, that danger remain elsewhere. When you pray for your children to be protected, you leave unnamed children who will not be. Let's move to the nativity and the rubble, Adam. A few brows furrowed. You celebrate a child born into poverty, the man said, but only because his poverty has been sanctified by time. You place him in a clean manger, beneath soft light, far from the smell, the fear, and uncertainty. The child was born without security, without control, without power, and the room was still and silent. You sing of angels announcing peace, he went on, but peace does not arrive by announcement alone. It comes when someone yields their place, their comfort, and their advantage. The people in the crowd are showing their discomfort audibly as they shifted and moved their candles from one hand to another. You pray for joy, the man said. Yet joy was born in a place of exhaustion and risk. You praise humility, yet pray never to be made humble. You honor shepherds, but hope to never smell like sheep. A voice rose, defensive but uncertain. That isn't what we mean. The old man nodded. I know. That's why it must be spoken. He looked again toward the manger. The child you honor tonight grew up to say, Blessed are the poor. Love your enemies. Protect the widow and the orphan. Welcome the refugee and the immigrant. Whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. He let these words settle in their hearts. If you welcome this child, he said, you welcome disruption. If you adore him, you must also follow him. Into inconvenience, into generosity, and into costly love. The candles burned lower. To pray for peace, the man said at last, is to pray to become peacemakers. To pray for light is to consent to be seen. To pray for room in the end is to offer your own space. He stepped back. I have spoken the unspoken half of the prayer, he said. The part that asks God not what God will do, but what you will do. Now that the child has come. And with that, the man turned and disappeared into the dark beyond the door, and no one moved. The manger still remained. The candles still burned. The night was holy as it was before, but it was no longer simple. And finally, the reader returned to the front. And this time, the prayer was shorter. God, he said quietly, make room in us. The people lifted their candles, and together in the fragile light, they whispered, Amen. That's the end of this story. A second story, and maybe Kevin can help me out with this as well. Years ago, on Christmas Eve, we had a lady visit our gathering who was in we want to say, duress, emotional duress. She was at our shop up in Tigard and was really hurting, just in pain. So she stood up on the front stage and started yelling and getting attention. And I can't think of a better narrative for Christmas Eve, the shock and the chaos, than that. I still remember that and hearken to it often. Some of you were there for it. But that was Christmas Eve. This narrative was written to coincide with Mark Twain's The War Prayer. It's a piece of prose poetry combating Christian nationalism. Yes, it was back then as well. The basis is this: to pray for God's favor and help in dominion while we are the ones in power and control is to try to coerce God into condoning the oppression of people. I have 3 questions for you, and then we'll come back together and debrief. take one more minute.
All right, let's bring those thoughts to a close and back up front. Does anyone have any comments to make to enrich the conversation? Maybe something you learned around your table or something that was said around your table in the answer to a question? Does anyone have any comments? Such silence.
Go ahead, Colleen. Yeah.
We were talking about when we pray, we're praying for our parents, for our children, and really, can we change it, expand that, praying for all children, all that, the safety for everyone.
I don't think it's a you have to deny one to pray for another. I think we can pray for both, right? Even in prosperity or an opportunity, to pray for safety is still a valid prayer. Yet to remember oppression and marginalization is definitely. Who are the marginalized? When we ask that question about marginalized, who are they to us?
Immigrants.
Immigrants, okay.
Street people.
LGBTQ plus, yeah. Community. Say again.
Yeah.
Fellow humans, yeah. Who are the marginalized?
Mm.
We have ancient stories about what happens in the margins, like Ruth. We have ancient stories like that, where Ruth is at the margins. So the people that were at the margins of the fields, they would be the gleaners, right? The ones that would take what was left over to feed their families. So those were the people definitely very far outside of the farm field, if you want to use that as a metaphor, the farm field of the margins. I would say the statement that I made about empires, children are the victims of adult fear. That is very true in our world today. The people of the Ukraine and the children that are basically victims in the Ukraine, children in Gaza, victims in Gaza. Those are victims, true, innocent, did nothing to deserve any of that victim. Can't place blame except on the adults in that kind of situation. There's no way around that because of adult fear. Because of adult fear.
When you think of Christmas, it's a time of giving, sharing, generosity, compassion. Are resources infinite or finite? Okay. Any more? Depends on the resource. Do you believe that resources are infinite or finite?
Finite with a distribution problem was
Okay.
one thought.
I tend to believe that all resources is infinite. Like there's no way to grasp how much wealth the world has. There is a distribution problem, but we have the ability. And so the people that are on the margins are the ones where those resources are moving away from. Does not always mean they're poor. No.
No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Access is a big marginalization problem. Wealth, food. What else would be marginalization problem? Skin color.
Sexuality.
Yeah. Gender, sexuality.
In our first Sanctuary Sunday time about immigration, there was a gentleman by the name of Aaron Earlywine he was working with Haitian immigrants in Springfield. And he was talking about at the very end of his talk, which was very impactful to me. That's why I'm remembering it right now, where a trans person rode in on a motorcycle and was there to help because they knew what it was like to be hated. They knew what it was like to be unseen. Yet they were riding a motorcycle and coming in from a distant town.
And
so they
standing at the
obviously
door.
had gas and means, right? And so they weren't necessarily poor. They just knew what it was like to
Be on the
be
outside.
on the margin. Correct.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
That's something that we need and want to kind of, there's not a fight on it, but when you're not accepted, we all know what that feels like. But
Yeah. And so acceptance is that we all can give it and receive it, but we also know how it feels like to not be. I think of diversity, equity, inclusion, and the final letter was supposed to be B, belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're not creating a sense of belonging in our communities, it doesn't matter what we're doing with the other three letters.
Adam, can you put the first picture, the La Sagrada Familia?
The immigrant family. Hold on, everybody.
The La Sagrada Familia, the Holy Family. What does this picture invoke in you?
we representative of holiness.
Right.
And then, do we see a family like that as holy?
The halo is represents holy, and if you look at the child's head, it has the alpha and omega symbol on it, which represents God. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Definitely that class of people is what Joseph, Mary, and Jesus would look like at the time.
Mary was young. Joseph was probably older. Mary was probably 13. And if you look at the Pieta in Italy, when you look at the Pieta, she's holding Jesus coming off of the cross in the Pieta, and her face has always been youthful. So if you look at her face in the Pieta, it's the same age as when she would have birthed Jesus. So that was kind of a trend or a common thing to do to signify that Mary basically never aged.
She's the eternal mother.
She's the eternal mother. So the age of Mary has always been youthful, but notice in the story that Joseph kind of disappears, and so it's thought that he could have died. So Joseph was older, but people didn't live. I mean, their life expectancy was low. So older, meaning, let's say he was
40.
30, 40 years old
Yeah.
while she was 13. I know that's like, yeah, but that was common.
I believe life expectancy at the time was under 45
Right.
through war, famine, disease.
So older, is relative, I guess.
How has the meaning of Christmas changed for you? Did anyone have a good answer for that one? Nope.
Well, as a child, it was all about the presents and,
Yeah.
and the candy and the fun,
Mm-hmm.
how much fun it's going to be, and Santa Claus, and all that. And of course, when you get to go, that starts to change into, at least my case, the ability to give, so that I always get more pleasure over seeing somebody open up a gift they really, really want, versus getting anything out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's evolved at that point. So now it's not about getting, it's about giving.
Transition from getting to giving.
Yes.
Nice. Yeah, that's great.
I think as you get older, you think more about giving outside of
Mm-hmm. Your family gets bigger, perhaps.
It shows in family, maybe even.
So as you get older, you think about giving outside of your family.
not just at the holiday.
Yeah. And yeah,
Right.
Christmas is every day.
Yes. Correct. Correct.
Mm-hmm.
The shadow of the cross of Easter reflects back onto Christmas. Looking at the joy of Christmas.
A lot about this year is a lot of times we approach Christmas almost like a summer holiday. There's things to do and parties to go to and all of this fun stuff. But it's like women hibernate and look inward and welcome the darkness. And so I think that's an invitation to meditate on some of that first stuff. That when we get lost in the busyness of it.
Yeah. So when we get lost in the busyness and not the rest and I guess winter is a season of death because you have the metaphor of the trees losing all their leaves. A lot of people die in winter as well, but because it's just the time to do so. And
It's true.
it's pretty true. So you have a time to reflect, to meditate, and be in that period of waiting. I think that Christmas and the Advent is about the waiting, right? That's what the word means. And so if we're not waiting for spring, the new life to come out.
I think how Christmas has changed for me is, of course, all that was said, but yet this new conversation about capitalism and someone is gaining and someone is losing in that system. That the more somebody gains, it's always on the back of someone else. And that's been a new conversation for me in the last decade, where what I'm participating in actually does truly matter, or what I purchase or what I acquire does matter, because that was either someone was, or in some cases actually died to give me that. And so that conversation is important. So this Christmas, I decided that I would 100% buy everything that I purchased from an individual or a local company, or I made it, to add more meaning. Now, Did I get 100%? No. I was probably 90%. But 90%, I was committed to 100%, and I ended up at 90% of everything that I purchased had that kind of meaning behind it, so that I could at least so and so's soccer fee, or their music lesson, that I could actually trace those dollars back. I can't 100% tell you that the purchase and the product actually was responsibly sourced. I don't know yet. I participated that way to add a little bit more meaning to gift exchange versus just a more materialistic, capitalistic exchange. This picture here is of Gaza. This is called Christ in the Rubble. Christ in the Rubble.
Do you want to introduce the artist a little bit? Do you have their information?
This artist is, sorry, I should have it, because I really have enjoyed this artist. I'm going to have to look it up later. I don't have it on my,
We'll send the information about the artist later.
right.
She is an iconographer, so she makes like present day icons. I think she is a Black individual.
I don't know.